Hello, and welcome to another. We're having another. This is another video in the series of Why Do You Believe? And in this case, I'm talking to a fellow, Steve, who said that he had, if I remember correctly, he'd been a lifelong atheist, and some association with some, atheist activist organizations and so forth, which we'll ask him about in a moment. And then somehow after that, he became Catholic, and this, of course, is got my curiosity up. So, Steve, explain to me first. And the reason I ask is because I've talked to a lot of people who, I mean, there are a lot of evangelicals who say that they were, dyed in the wool, card carrying, how do they do? Did they use all of their own terms, evangelical atheist or whatever? But the fact is, and then they suddenly, accepted God. And then when you hear the story, in many of these instances, what Kirk Cameron, for example, is one who famously declared himself to have always been an atheist, and yet he's praying to a God he clearly already believed in. So, and there's a number of others too, like we could draw a list later when my memory is working a little better. I can't remember all these people off the top of my head. But in your case, how would we know that you were in fact atheist at one point in your life?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And that's a great question, because one of the toughest things is to hear that you were never really an atheist. It's kind of funny after spending so much time and reading and just my whole worldview and life view was that very much that of, I guess I would call it now scientism. I should start to just justify that. Maybe I should start back and point out that, I was raised by my parents are immigrants to the country, and they didn't speak English very well. So I kind of grew up disattached in that way. And I learned to only trust what I learned in academics and science. I was really skeptical my whole life. I remember in first grade, I would be the one that I remember exactly where I was in a playground and telling kids that, this Santa Claus stuff doesn't add up. And it was a way of life for me. I really felt like people just didn't get it. Like, why are you falling for these things? This belief, there's no evidence for it. And there was no religiousness in my home. I never saw anybody in my family pray or follow anything, but I was baptized Catholic. But it was just, it's kind of counterproductive, because all I saw was hypocrisy and people with luxury cars, just living it up, kind of. And none of this can be right. They're not doing what it says. And but so I went through school. I guess my first years up to high school I was pretty agnostic. I just didn't really care or even think about it. Just trying to go through life and figure things out. I did really well in school, especially in math and science, and got into the computer field. I've been programming since computers since 1980. I won some computer programming contests, and it just seemed to come naturally to me. And I kind of went through life thinking like that. Why don't people just get this? Maybe I know things. I can figure out things that other people can't. It just I was like the problem solver everywhere I went to work. And I see that now in Richard Dawkins and others, and Christopher Hitchens. They kind of have that same attitude. I think Richard Dawkins endorsed this Brights concept, where maybe you kind of separate a group where people figure out things. And anyway, so all along I was an avid reader. I was always trying to figure out philosophy and how we're here and what's this religion business. Actually, I wasn't trying to figure out religion. I was just trying to figure out science and how the universe worked. I'm really a nerd, so in my spare time I would take a course on cosmology, everything from physics and linguistics and history. Hundreds of podcasts, and so it was a long process. It's hard to say when I started converting or when things shifted, because I could see things mounting. And about 10 years ago, I started seeing some credibility. I discounted all the rational arguments for God. I thought those are ridiculous. Don't believe in any one of them. but I started seeing there's a little truth in some of these things.
Okay, we'll get to that in
And
just a
over
moment.
time,
But before we get to your conversion, what I was specifically asking for was, like you said, you had some affiliations, and I wanted to hear about those.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, please stop me if I get off track. But yeah, so back in the '90s, I was pretty, going in back and between anti-theist, agnostic, and atheist. We'd have debates at Ffrf about what is an atheist. There's a strong atheist, a passive atheist, aggressive atheist, all these things. I take the technical definition of atheism means not theist. So
good.
I was I remember first when I was starting to have a lot of doubts about religion and its role in the world. I kind of had the same view that I hear you talk about in your podcast, and that's very destructive, the worst thing ever happened to the world, mankind. I heard Dan Barker on a talk show late one night, so I eventually signed up with Ffrf, went to some of his conferences in Alabama. I met James Randi, hung out with him. I tried to get my wife into it, and she's kind of funny. She said, these people need to get a life. But I hung on to it for a few years. I couldn't really convince my family, but my wife was a believer, but not actively practicing anything. So I even, when Bobby Henderson came online with Flying Spaghetti Monster, I even called him up and offered him a job because I was in the tech business and he was getting his website going. I thought it was hilarious. So I'm actually ordained in the Church of Flying Spaghetti Monster. I keep that card just for grins. As far as activism goes, I would try to convince everybody I knew that this religion business is nonsense, and I would give out Carl Sagan's Cosmos series as presents.
Yeah. So what was your affiliation with the Ffrf?
I was just a member. Go to the conferences. Okay. I read all the newsletters. I read Dan Barker's Biblical Errancy and most of the stuff he wrote. I believe what he's taught about the Greek having so many errors in the Bible and so many things like that.
Okay, and I also saw a picture of you in the ACA library.
Yeah. Last year I worked in Austin and happened just to live about a mile away from the Austin Atheist office, and kind of part of my heart is still in that mentality. It's kind of my people. So I strolled in. I actually go for walks. I walk right by it. So I strolled in just to talk to people. Spoke to Eric Murphy for a few hours. That was good.
Okay, so this was after your conversion when you were at the ACA.
Oh, yeah, I converted about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then let's get back to what you were starting to allude to before. You said you had rejected the rational arguments for theism, and I reject that there are rational arguments for theism. But I mean, let's pick something that managed to convince you. Yeah, or whatever you think is most important to bring up. I'll just let you take the reins.
Yeah, that's one of the fallacies I'd like to address. I keep hearing atheists say, "What's the one thing that convinced you?" And it kind of falls into the framework that I would point out that shows why people don't believe. It's really a holistic philosophy and not that one quick magic trigger that's going to convince anybody. It's a whole mindset and a holistic truth.
Well, let me clarify on that, if I may, real quick. I love deconversion stories because they are that one thing that often happens. I mean, it's always a different thing, and that's what makes it fascinating. I mean, the course that people take to get out of their belief is always interesting because it's a chink in the armor. It's when they found out that something they believed in wasn't true at all, right? And so if that's not true, then how do the dominoes fall after that? But it's always, the stories are always so different, and the interpersonal relationships affected on all of that is fascinating. But it all does start with the one thing.
Yeah, there's usually a catalyst. But
I mean, for me, for example, if in order to be Catholic, you can't just and everybody that I've met that adopts a religious belief, they drop right into whatever they were baptized into, whatever they were raised into. It's like what Darrell Ray wrote about the Godfathers. Whatever he said, that people who were non-believers, if they were raised with a particular religion, that they're going to go into that religion at some point in later in years, and for reasons that are kind of inexplicable. And so I feel that that's maybe where we're going to now. You were baptized Catholic, you suddenly became Catholic. But for me, there has to be a number of steps of gradation. I mean, first of all, why would it, before I could be Catholic, I would have to be Christian. Before I could be Christian, I would have to be theist. And before I could be a theist, I would have to know that the supernatural exists. So you have to show, before you can show that a God is even possible, you have to show that the supernatural is possible, right? And if we don't have a soul, and we know, again, not only is there no reason to know that not only is there no reason to believe that we have a soul, we have plenty of good reasons not to believe that, or God, or any of that. So there's a whole lot of steps I would have to go through that people like yourself apparently didn't. You just like you. So
I did, Aaron. It took 10 years. I took the long way. I would describe it as climbing the north face of K2. I really wouldn't believe it if I didn't do it myself. It's probably Hillary and Sir Edmund Hillary. If you ask him how'd you get to the top of Everest, he would say, I don't even know how I did it, but I did it.
Okay, well then tell me.
I took the long rational path. So I guess I'll take a few of the major milestone. Show you some of the milestones. There were several.
I'm not trying to pigeonhole you. I want you to go wherever you want to go with this. I just wanted to set up the parameters that I would need. I love the way you're saying. I think I heard you on David Ross's podcast, and you think exactly like I thought for most of my life, and a very step-by-step, logical, rational construction. And I'm in the software business, and the only thing I believed is in 0 and 1. I could build a system on the existence of 0 and 1. Every step has to be rational and have a firm foundation. So what I guess some of the key steps for me was I was studying as a computer guy. I was studying, how does consciousness work? Where does that come from? There was a lot of progress being made in like holography and nanotechnology in my field. So I started studying, well, how does the brain do these things to give us memory and consciousness and self-awareness? So I used to go to conferences on this, and I met researchers, and it started happening. I saw the emperor has no clothes. Nobody knows how this stuff works. You literally get these guys laughing at you. Yes, well, where is this storage? How can I recall memories? How am I self-aware? And they have no freaking clue, Aaron. None. It's consciousness is a living miracle right in front of your face, staring back at you from the mirror every day. Or it's something that is so convoluted that we haven't been able to make sense of it. We know that it is emergent, and that it is an emergent process.
Nope.
Yep. We know that it is cumulative, right? With increased complexity in neural networks and so forth.
That's a hand-waving appeal to complexity.
No, it's not. We know that is the case. We don't understand how it works, all of it, but we do understand how some of it works, and we understand that is what it is. No. So it's not a miracle. I mean, nowhere ever do you get to say that anything is a miracle. There's things that we haven't explained, and God of the gaps fallacy, we can't explain it, therefore God. I'm not going there. So
I wouldn't want you to. I just want you to make a note there. There's something very mysterious going on right behind our eyes. We have not been able to explain.
I wouldn't say the word mysterious. and when some people say unexplained, other people think explained by magic. So unexplained means that there is no explanation. And if you make up a magical entity for it, if you call it a miracle, right, that's not an explanation. I'm
not saying to do that. Absolutely not. Do not jump to anything. Okay. Just make a note that there's some point of evidence here. And I think this is the way you approach your skeptical arguments about like Noah's flood. There's not one definitive thing. There's all these lines of evidence that together point to one conclusion.
Well, there's actually any one of those things in and of itself disprove the flood. But the fact that we have so many different lines of evidence against it, I mean, any one of them is enough to disprove the flood. One by itself can disprove the flood. But the fact that we have volumes of them is significant. And for example, I'm currently taking classes in anthropology and primatology, cultural and physical anthropology, and like every lesson disproves the young Earth aspect. Every one.
Well,
And
wait, let me ask you about that.
The things that
Because
we know about the ancient Earthers are a lot more. There's a lot more to it than what the laity ever gets to read.
I think this is a problem in our education system. They're teaching conclusions, not how to think. You know, philosophy shouldn't be a class. It should be a part of every class.
They're exactly not doing that. They're doing the exact opposite of that by showing you how they got to these conclusions, right? So they tell you that this is what we know, this is how we know it, right?
Yeah.
So how did they acquire the data that implied this conclusion? What were the tests that were done? What was the type of analysis that were made that lead this way, right? And so that's what they did. And they also start with the previous conclusion, and then the studies done to support that, and then why the conclusion had to change when those studies started pointing a different direction. Why and how did they point a different direction? And then how could you test that? How could you disprove it? What other method could you use that would verify one or the other? And then everything ends up pointing this other way, which was not the way you started with. And so this is completely opposite of what you're talking about. We are teaching people how to think. We're not teaching people what to think.
Well, that's great to hear. And you probably know more about geology and dating than I do, but just from my own personal self, Aaron, what I saw was inference and supposition, ratios of isotopes, decay rates. This is not objective information. It's not reproducible. We don't have
something hold on. Let's just verify it. Subjective means that it's down to your personal opinions and, aesthetics and whatever. But when you have any number of people have their if you confer with other people, then that could be said to be objective because it's not down.
Isn't that religion? Then religion is true because
hear me out. So if subjectivity is down to your personal opinions or perspectives, and then you confer that with other people, already it's no longer subjective. But when you've got something that is completely indifferent to your opinions at all, I mean, we have what the data actually shows, regardless what you want to believe about it. That's objective. So everything we're talking about here is, from my perspective, objective.
I would disagree with that. I've had a much stricter definition of objective. There's scientific standards for reproducibility, verification, deconstruction, and what I found in geology just doesn't meet that. In fact, what happened at Mount St. Helens, and I don't want to get off on this, so I really wish you would maybe bring a geologist on your show. It's just a waste of time, I think, for you and I to discuss this.
Okay.
But the strata and ratios and what happened at Mount St. Helens show that those features happen a lot faster than millions of years.
I saw another demonstration that kind of went along the lines of what you're talking about, where somebody gets out a garden hose and goes out into his yard, and he runs the garden hose in the dirt in his backyard, and sure enough, that water in seconds creates what looks like a canyon. Yeah, and it's a nice superficial demonstration for people who don't understand what the realities are and just want to believe, really, really want to believe something else. But when we're talking about sedimentary layers, things that have to be percolated very, very slowly, they can't be done fast. When we're talking about layers of granite and such that have to be worn through very, very slowly, and then we have all these different layers in here. We're like how many was it? 15 different stratigraphic layers that are like in the Grand Canyon, for example. So we know, and then everything about the way that river courses through that, we know that this could not have happened in about 5 minutes like the creationists insist that it did. I've seen the anti-science apologetics for Mount St. Helens. And you're right. If you're not a geologist, if you've never studied geology, you might be fooled by that. And I was not a geologist, but I know just enough that doesn't fool me. So there is no argument for the flood. We know for absolutely certain the global flood did not happen.
It's not an essential for the faith.
I'm not saying that I'm not just saying that it couldn't happen. We know that it couldn't happen. We know buckets of reasons why it couldn't happen. We also know that it didn't happen, even if it could have. Even if it was magic, we know that it didn't happen.
Well, I admit, going back to my conversion, I found the hardest thing. I didn't even think about Noah's flood when I was converting. I just thought when the thought came up, I thought it's impossible to believe. And I thought, well, maybe there was a local flood, and I'm sure you've addressed that, but I'd rather not go off onto that. It's really not my field. And how I came to it with consciousness, in my years of study of how neuroscience, the neuroscience data and the consciousness studies, I realized there's no material effects of memory and thinking in the brain. So I thought maybe there's this higher, we have brain waves, and there's this interference pattern that maintains consciousness. That's why when you go to sleep, you're not conscious. But when you wake up, this brain energy creates this wave pattern, and that's how we're consciousness. This was my hypothesis, and it fit into the evidence that I saw in neuroscience, that there's this wave energy. And so I started thinking, if the material in the skull can create these wave patterns and form consciousness, why couldn't this happen before? Why? And even Stephen Hawking did a BBC special where he speculated, well, maybe there could be consciousness within suns because they've had billions of years of interactive wave energy, right? And so I started thinking on a deeper level. I was studying cosmology and with the Higgs field, and there's a substrate to matter and energy deep down, and I thought that's hyperreactive. With quantum physics, it shows us there's entanglement across vast space. It kind of instantly reacts, independent of space and time. So, or space at least. You can take an entangled particle from one end of the universe to another and change the properties, and the other one changes instantly. So I started realizing that it's possible that the cosmos is conscious. There's the same consciousness that we have could exist in other places, maybe the universe itself. So that opened my idea to the mind, to theism, that there's this consciousness, universal consciousness.
That's an interesting thought. That reminds me of a poll that was taken some years ago where they asked a number. There was some like Science Academy, and I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head. I mentioned it in my book. I gave it the right name, but they asked this entire council or administration of scientists an interesting question. They said, the simple question: do you believe in a God or a higher power? And I'm sure that they meant by a higher power, they meant to clarify what they meant by a God. But the scientists took it differently. Do you believe in either a God or a higher power? And there were a number of scientists who answered that they believed in a higher power, but they did not believe in a God. And, the only clarification any of them would offer would be something like Spinoza's God. What is Einstein's concept of God, which technically is not a God at all.
Yeah, and I had that for a couple of years. I was at Spinoza's point. I think there's probably a theological name for that.
Yeah, and so
naturalism.
Again, even if we were to accept the hypothetical situation that in some sense the cosmos has a consciousness, even if we were to call that consciousness God, at no point ever would the Bible be correct. At no point ever would that disprove evolution. At no point ever would there have been a global flood. If God exists, evolution is still true, and the Bible is still man-made mythology. There's no way around that. The Bible is already wrong, no matter what. Period. And evolution is supportable and demonstrable and provable. These two things are not going to be changed.
Well, I can't blame you for that, because that's exactly the way I thought.
Well, then tell me
right up until
what changed your mind that should change my mind?
Yeah. Well, I would first point out that there's two steps. You get to the point first where you're open to the possibility maybe there is this universe, cosmic consciousness. That's being open to it and truly agnostic. I wasn't a truly agnostic person. I affirmatively believe there could be no God for most of my life, 30, 40 years. And then, so the consciousness argument started opening my mind to the possible, hey, based on what I know about human consciousness, it very well could be there could be a cosmic consciousness. And then I went back and looked at the rational arguments and realized that this fits perfectly together. Again, not one of those rational arguments makes any sense on its own, but together they add up and fit. If there is a if there is a universal consciousness, then the teleology of the cosmos makes sense because it was designed. There was a
Well, why would you make that assumption?
because my study of cosmology and high energy physics, there's a great deal of structure there. It's
Well, why would it be intentional?
the fine tuning argument.
We know has failed for so many reasons. Why, we know that we can't be fine-tuned. The universe certainly is not fine-tuned for life because we are adapted to only a fraction of the surface of this one mote of dust, this one speck.
You can't make that claim unless you know the purpose. You can't claim that it's not fine-tuned.
Well, we know that we will be killed instantly anywhere outside of the tiny microscopic parameter to which we are limited, and everything else is so far away that we don't, the things that we've envisioned in Star Wars and Star Trek of being able to hop to all these other worlds as if they're all islands in an archipelago is just not the case. There's no way we can even imagine doing that at this point. Well, we can imagine how to do that. Obviously, we've done it in science fictions, but we don't have a way that it will practically work. There's no way that we can take ourselves to another world, and even if we could, that other world would be so different. Then we still wouldn't be able to survive there, and there would have to be so many things that I'm gonna do another speech kind of along these lines, but I hope that you see where I'm going with that.
Since you can't see a purpose for the vastness of the universe, you think that it then doesn't make sense. The universe is that
nothing to do with whether I can see a purpose for it. Okay, we know that the fine tuning argument is not it.
I disagree. I mean, again, by itself, it doesn't hold weight. But together, like evidence mounting in a trial, and this is
so we have the one thing, the fine-tuning argument that is invalid for the reasons I just said, and you said that by itself it won't hold weight. Let's set that aside for a moment and see if anything else, when connected to that, begins to hold weight. So what else have you got? I don't mean to be contesting you. It's just that you say, I used to think like you back when I was at your stage. Yeah. And, hey, if I'm wrong about this, I want to know. I want you to show me that I'm wrong, right?
Yep.
I don't think you are, and I think if God,
I'm not a good apologist.
I probably need to send me to hell for not believing. Then it's on Him for giving me all of the proof that He doesn't exist. Not even evidence, proof that He doesn't exist. He gave me proof that He doesn't exist, and then He's going to damn me for that. And the Holy Scriptures, both the Quran and the Bible, both say that God works that way, that God will deceive people into not believing so He can punish us for the thing He set us up to do. We fell into the trap He set and baited.
Well, we're not going to have time here in 30 minutes to get through all those things. I'd love
whatever you're comfortable with.
I'd love to have like an ongoing thing with you too. I mean, it took me 10 years, Aaron, and just the expectation that somebody can have a quick and easy answer, I think, is part of the flaw. That's the fallacy. Tell me why. Give me one reason.
I don't commit fallacies, so I'm completely open. If you want to do an ongoing thing, if at the point, if we come to the end of it, I don't want to do more than an hour per session, but if we come to the end of an hour and you think that there would be some value in continuing, I'm down with that. And as I said, if there's any truth to your position, I'm of course going to be down to hearing it.
Well, I even beyond this podcast, I would love to have an open relationship with atheist groups. That's why I walked into Austin Atheists there, to just have an ongoing relationship, because I know that community. I come from it, and I see a lot of the right things. They're trying to be good, moral people, make the world a better place. And it's so tragic to me to see these straw men and misunderstandings about what Christianity is and theism.
So in the first few minutes of this conversation, we've established, I mean, and I've been wanting to do this for a long time. There was a guy, a Ramachandran, who did a beautiful TED talk on mirror neurons, and I would love to talk to him and other people in his field about the emergence of consciousness, because we know it is an emergent property. And here's an important way to prove that. I know that you're laughing and you're shaking your head, but there's some things to compare. You just brought up Mount St. Helens as an argument against deep time in geology. Every geologist that heard you say that groaned and put his face in his hands. at what you don't know. Now you laughed and imagine what they're doing at what you just said, because they're bewildered at what you just said. So I would love to have in the comments and in subsequent discussions, I would love to talk to a neurologist. I would love to talk to a geologist who were going to talk about how you were duped. Yes, you were duped by pseudoscientific arguments based on Mount St. Helens, because I've seen a number of them. They are pseudoscientific. And I've seen these scientific arguments, although I'm not adept in geology enough that I can convey them to you myself. Other geologists will. This is why Christian organizations like Wheaton University do not teach flood geology, because they're teaching actual scientists. And if you can maintain a belief in Jesus, but there's no way you can know geology.
I didn't even think about geology, Aaron, when I was going through this process. And
okay,
are you familiar with
Morton? Are you familiar with Dr. Glenn Morton?
No.
Okay, he was a young Earth creationist who was also a professional petrogeologist, and he contacted all of his own people that were part of this organization that he was involved in to inquire of them, all of them, when and where young Earth creationism ever accurately or pragmatically fit into their geology, and of course it never did. So he had volumes of data on the web that were disproving young Earth geology. And he was a young Earth creationist. He got right on the verge of becoming atheist himself, and then decided that believing in God was so important to him that it mattered more than truth. I've had some personal interactions with this guy, and it was very disturbing. He eventually took down his own information, took everything off the web, which was valuable to a lot of people, because he would rather, and he expressed this in a debate that we had organized, he didn't want atheists using his information to counter belief. He would rather people believe something that is wrong than not believe in God at all, which is a very disturbing thought for me.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him, and I think there's a lot of bad witnesses for the faith.
There's
cut to the chase here.
And there's zero good ones.
Yeah. Actually, that's what the faith says. We're all sinners.
No. There's no such thing as sin. There's just not a good witness for faith. Period. Zip.
Well, I look at Mother Teresa helping.
Okay,
millions of people.
Okay. Probably Mother Teresa is probably not going to be somebody that you want to choose on your side of.
Yeah, I know the Hitchens story. In fact, the Vatican, the story behind that, the Vatican invited him to be the devil's advocate, really, for her canonization, right? I mean, just on a human level, Aaron, a 100-pound lady picking up people out of the sewer and cleaning the crap off of them and putting them in a bed. How can you criticize this little lady?
and making them suffer.
Oh, please.
Their suffering.
Oh.
While taking millions.
You're talking about children. How many children did she rescue, Aaron? I mean,
I don't know how many you would be able to fairly call rescuing.
Millions, but around the world.
Yeah, around the world. She was praised. Throughout my youth, she was praised as this great humanitarian, and then Christians Christopher Hitchens. I stuck the first and last name together and called him Christians. Christopher Hitchens. Isn't that interesting how that happens? Broke this story about her. I think he was the one who broke it, and then several others followed suit. And now
it broke it. He was invited and educated by the Vatican to be the devil's advocate for her canonization.
Right.
And they must have been left. The funny thing about this, Aaron, you got to know, is when she gets up there and says, "Oh, she was terrible. She made them suffer and prolong their suffering." This is so funny to a Catholic, because we believe in the value of suffering. Like, you go to the gym, that
makes my point.
Pain is gain, Aaron.
Yeah,
I go to the gym all the time.
That point for me. Okay, so
I go to the gym all the time to encounter pain, and it makes me stronger. And in spiritual level, if this cosmic consciousness is there, this pain is going to exist.
Cosmic consciousness is there. Let's assume for a moment that there's a cosmic consciousness.
Yeah,
it's not Christian. The Bible's still wrong. Christianity is still wrong.
It would probably take another 2 hours to get just to from theism to Judaism to then Christianity and then Catholicism. It took me a few years to get through those final phases.
I'm open to the discussion, and I'm not going to try to restrict it. I just, how do I explain it? Because I understand the criticisms against me. I've seen plenty of criticisms against me that I'm not fair to believers because I show contempt for belief. And yes, I do. And there is a reason that I do, because it is dishonest to assert baseless speculation as though it were a matter of fact. And that's what religion does. And religion does that throughout. Every religion does that. But then among the worst of them is the Abrahamic religions, and worse than that even is Christianity, and worse than that even is Catholicism.
Yeah, it would take a long time to go through this. And I would point out that, Aaron, when I was converting, I had literally 10 million questions, like probably 10 million. And I'm still answering them. But there are good answers for everything.
We haven't heard one yet, but I'm patient.
Well, hey, think about this. If there is a consciousness, then everything is reasonable, because at the bottom of reality is consciousness.
Why?
By definition, if material is at the basis of reality, just energy, then it's literally nonsense. What
Why?
sense? Because it doesn't have reason. No.
No, you're describing you were describing an opposite world. So if you're
describing subjectivism, you think the reasonability of the universe exists within your understanding of it.
No, I am not making the assumption that you do without warrant, that if there were a cosmic consciousness, that it is necessarily sane.
Sane?
Yeah, because it is evidently not. Okay, so that we don't have an intent of purpose. We don't have that evidence. So I don't want to make all of the assumptions that you've had to compile on top of other assumptions, none of which have been warranted, none of which can be justified, to get to the compilation of assumptions that you've arrived at. Now, if I grant you the first thing, if we were to say that somehow, in some sense, that we could establish, and I'm not saying that, I don't believe that. But if we were to imagine the possibility, I will grant, that there could be, in some sense, a consciousness to the entirety of the concept. I don't believe that, but I'll grant that's
very fair. Yes.
Okay. At no point do we get to God. At no point could we get to.
And I agree. That's not a logical step from consciousness to Jesus. Nobody is claiming that.
And you never will get. From
here was the next step for me. After there's this consciousness, the next question is he aware of what's going on in the universe?
Evidently not.
Because people are suffering or whatever.
No, it's just like, how does God refuse to intervene in the Holocaust? How does God go against his own edicts throughout all of the fables in the Old Testament? How does God ignore all of the tragedies that are going up, yet he intercedes to make sure that Trump is our president?
or nothing makes sense unless there's eternal life. Even as an atheist,
he lets all of nothing starve in Ethiopia, but he lets your football team win, or he helped you find your key.
Well, I'd love to address each one of those. Just for an example, that starving child in Africa. Let's say he dies at 4 or 5 years old. If there's this cosmic being and we have this eternal soul, what do you think is going to happen to that soul for the rest of eternity?
Well, there's such thing as a soul. That's another thing we know.
Well, just for the sake of argument, that soul is closer to God than you and I could ever be, because we've been given 1,000 times as much.
Soul that doesn't exist, that we know doesn't exist, is closer to the other thing that doesn't exist than you are. You're right. You're right. They're both imaginary. That makes them both closer to each other.
Well, here's one thing about
real beings.
Here's something about consciousness studies that I learned that makes it possible to see evidence for a soul and an immaterial mind. fMRI observations show that when you think something, brain matter changes, right? Connections form. It forms the brain. I'm sure this expert on mirror neurons will tell you this. So
no, I fully accept that.
One of the conferences I went to, there was a venture capitalist and a lawyer and a neuro researcher working on this project for stock traders to measure the brain activity for when they're doing a stock, because there's this initial flash of activity and then some more activity. And they're finding that when the stock trader second guesses himself, he's usually wrong. So they were coming up with a system so that the stock trader could go with his first intuition. So that and other timing in the timing analysis within the brain shows thinking happens before the brain activity. The brain is a reception of the of the mind. It's not the cause.
So you think the mind is not an emergent property of the brain?
Well, it's a difficult subject, like Thomas Aquinas says. They're
Please, I wish I could talk to a Christian once in my life when they didn't bring up fucking Aquinas.
You would love him. He's the most rational guy that ever lived.
They always want to pigeonhole me into something I don't hold to, right? I mean, I don't.
Aaron, you would love Aquinas if you met him.
Just because I say that I don't want to be convinced of something if I can't verify that it's true, that doesn't mean that I believe in verificationism. Yet everybody wants to say that I'm a logical positivist, right? Well, they want to put me in a box that I don't belong in. And then they say, well, that went out of fashion in the 19th century or the 20th century. And so how are you going to overturn the 20th century? By bringing up some dickhead from the 12th century. That's really
he's a nice guy.
So then when I bring up Hume, he's from the 19th century. He doesn't override your 12th century guy. Why? So that's one of the problems I have with philosophy. There's no hard proof of who's right and who's wrong. It's just whatever you want to believe, whoever you want to side with.
Well, I think there's some key points that you'd probably like to know. And Matt, what's his name over there? Austin Atheist, Matt Dillhunty, probably all over this about.
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah. One thing to think about, Descartes got to the bottom of what is knowledge and what are facts. All we really have is our subjective experience, right?
And again, you bring up Descartes, right? And so he said, he's famous for having said, "I think, therefore I am."
Cogito.
But much more disturbingly, what he actually said was, that he can't verify that he himself ever existed. The only thing he can be certain about is that God existed, which God didn't exist.
No. He didn't get there. He was a non-believer. In fact, he got into occultism.
But he did say that.
Yeah, well, that was later. You're putting together two things that didn't happen together. He first got to the bottom.
In his ultimate skepticism, he comes to the conclusion that he can't verify that Descartes can't verify that he himself exists, but he can only be certain that God exists.
Well, it is a leap of faith to believe that we exist, right? I mean, there's no proof.
Right, and any belief that requires faith should be rejected for that reason, because it is the most auto-deceptive delusion one can possibly hold.
Wait a minute. What is the proof that you exist?
What is the proof that I exist?
Yeah. Your sensory input, all you have is your sensory input.
That's true.
You could be a simulation.
And how does science work then? Science then takes what aligns with everything else. We have the most, what is the word?
That's more sensory input.
I'm sorry, what?
It's just more sensory input. All you have is your
as Hume said, we have to make these assumptions that we ourselves exist, that there are other, we have to.
That's what Descartes was saying.
So we have to make these assumptions that we are.
Well, you don't have to.
We do have to. We do have to if we can get through the thought. We have to make the same assumptions that a baby or a beast would, that there are other minds that exist outside ourselves and that there is an independent reality. And he said it is literally impossible, and he's correct about this, it is literally impossible to function on any other assumption. So science goes with what works. We still teach Dalton's theory of the atom. We know that there are flaws. We know that it's not accurate, but we still teach it because it works in certain applications. And so you have to take what works, and you have to continue to use what works, even when you know that there are flaws there. And you can. I
disagree. I mean, Bertrand Russell functioned as a scientist.
You're wrong about this. I'm sorry, you're wrong. We do use Dalton's theory, Dalton's model of the atom, and we also use the quantum model of the atom, and we use them independently for different applications because they work independently in different applications. So what it proves to us is that we don't know exactly how atoms work, but we know that there's this aspect and that this will work for certain calculations, and that there's this other aspect, or this other model rather, will work for other applications. And we can't just say, hey, we don't know exactly how this works, so there's no truth to it at all, because we know that's not correct either. So
yeah, I'm not sure which line you're going down there, but
as Hume,
I mean,
to answer your question, as Hume said, we have to, obligately have to, make this assumption that there isn't mind-independent reality. It is literally impossible. It is literally madness.
pragmatism.
It is madness to try to assume any other thing. You cannot function any other way. So according to the model that works, even if there was a flaw with the model that works, we know that this model works. And so scientific...
How do you explain a solipsist then?
I'm sorry, what?
How do you explain a solipsist? To go through life just fine. Bertrand Russell was a
No, they
solipsist.
don't. No, they don't.
Well, they have.
How many debates have you watched? You could still tell me that solipsists go through life just fine? No, their respiratory functions continue. You know, their pulmonary systems continue to operate. It doesn't matter that they're insane.
Hey, if you ever really meet one, you know to be kind to them, because when they go, we all go. Right?
Wait, what?
If you ever meet a solipsist, be very nice to them, because when they go, we all go.
How many have I met so far?
Matt seemed to be toying with solipsism when I last heard one of his shows.
I've never been nice to one of them. It's a failing that I have. It's my own fault that I don't know how to cure them. I don't know how to help them.
Well, what I'm saying is we're projections of their minds. So if anything happens to them, we're all in trouble.
I got you. It was a joke that I missed.
Yeah. Yes.
By the way, I don't know how many other people care, but every time I do a video, somebody wants to know what I'm drinking. So on this particular occasion, because it was Turkey Day yesterday, I'm drinking a local brewery, full-grown Jack by Tubbs Brewery in Texas. It is the best pumpkin stout I've ever had.
All right. That's pretty impressive. You can drink beer, do all this. But one thing I'd like to follow up with that line of thinking we're talking about, what is real? What is at the basis of reality? Because that was key to my conversion. What is knowable? We really have our sensory input. And like you said, we got to be pragmatic to exist and believe that it's really a leap of faith to believe that our sensory input is real, that other people exist, other minds exist.
Why would that be a leap of faith?
Well, the Latin root for the word faith is fide, which is the same or basis of the word confidence.
Every philosopher that I've argued with insists that faith is not fideism.
Confidence? Well, I don't want to debate semantics.
Especially when they have a PhD and a professor in their name. Well, then they're so very confident that they're better than you, of course, you know. My faith is not fideism. I don't know dick about jack about science, but I'm better than you because I have a doctorate.
Exactly.
And that seems to be the summary about how to be a philosopher to me.
Yeah, and I'm not a professional philosopher. I'm sure Matt knows more about philosophy than I do. I'm just telling you how I got there.
Everybody knows more about philosophy than I do. Okay, but the philosophers that I've talked to, this is the kind of unrestrained arrogance.
Yeah.
That I've seen. You know, you don't understand philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm currently taking classes, as I mentioned, and I tried to schedule some philosophy courses. Unfortunately, I've already taken all the necessary philosophy courses. Maybe after I get the degree, I'll take some just for the sheer whim of it. Because I am interested in, if there is a weakness to my argument, everybody wants to say, well, Aaron is bad at philosophy. Okay, show me where, show me why, show me how. And
you don't have to be
that hasn't happened.
I've only taken maybe one course in philosophy, and just as studying as a layman, I think you can get what you need. In fact, you need it for all of the subjects. It really shouldn't be a course. It should be a part of every course. That what is a fact? What is subjective experience? What is objective? What's verifiable?
I've taken 3 or 4 courses in philosophy. That's why they wouldn't let me take another one, because they say you've already had more than you need. You've already taken superfluous classes beyond what your degree requires.
Well, you have what you need to know that really our experience is all we have, and so using that as a foundation of what we know, realizing that, I was going to tie that into how I led to my conversion, to realize that if consciousness is the one thing that we know for sure exists, everything else is suspect, right?
No, wait, no.
I think, therefore I am. You cannot get around that, because if you don't believe that you
Descartes
exist in your
himself
consciousness,
also said that he can't be sure that he himself exists. And another philosophy professor, matter of fact, the one I was just alluding to a moment ago, said that Dan Dennett, he was wrong about that. He's a professor and a PhD in philosophy, and he's in all of this, but he was still wrong about this when he said that Daniel Dennett, the world's most famous philosopher,
Daniel Dennett, a very famous philosopher.
living,
Oh, come on.
living.
No.
Okay.
Holy moly. You need to get out more often.
He's been called that.
Oh,
He's been called that on stages I've shared with him. Yeah, that's how he was introduced.
I suggest that you get out into bigger circles.
Okay, great, but that's still the way he was introduced. Okay, so what? So Daniel Dennett, this guy, this professor in philosophy, is telling me that Daniel Dennett held the belief that Daniel Dennett does not exist.
Yeah.
This professor in a seminary school, which I guess negates his professorship, has a PhD in Mother Goose, right? So he has the philosophy degree, which means that he can't prove that he's right about anything, and he has to redefine everything in order to pigeonhole his way out of that. He said that Daniel Dennett believed that Daniel Dennett did not exist because he said that the mind does not exist. And you said that's the one thing that we know for certain does exist.
Well, it's the most thing that we could know.
Christian philosopher says that we don't know that the mind exists. Right?
Okay, if you doubt that you exist, you have no basis for knowledge.
That our mind is only the product of somebody else's mind, that we are only the dream of Brahma, right? Except that what Daniel Dennett actually said, and I found this both in text and in video, was that when Daniel Dennett actually said that the mind was an emergent property that didn't come from one particular place. He said the mind does not come from a single place in the brain, that it is a cumulative emergent aspect
of hand waving. Yep.
Whole, right? So that does not mean that Daniel Dennett is, when Daniel Dennett says the mind doesn't come from any one place in the brain, doesn't mean that Daniel Dennett says that the brain doesn't come from, or that the mind doesn't come from the brain at all.
I thought his thesis was that the consciousness is an illusion. It's not what we think it is.
That's astute. I would accept that, because
that's his. What I've heard him explain it that way.
Yeah, and I would accept that too. But that also doesn't fall into what this seminary professor is trying to tell me, in his oh so arrogant Thurston Howell III kind of voice.
Oh gosh, that's annoying.
He's just so much better than me because he has a doctorate in philosophy, and so I don't understand anything. But he shot himself in the foot over and over and over again by misrepresenting everything necessary to in order to support his position. It was so annoying.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I asked forgiveness for all the annoying self-proclaimed Christians.
Why do you have to ask forgiveness? If there was a God, if there was a God worthy of worship, it could not be the Christian God. It could not be the Abraham.
Well, I think you're basing that conclusion on a lot of falsehoods, and we probably need another hour to go through those. Like you said about all the wars in the Bible and all the flood killing everybody, right? Why would that happen? None of it would make sense.
Conversations. I would be happy to have multiple conversations with you. We can do one a week if you like, because I'm actually enjoying it.
Oh, cool.
And I appreciate you, which is rare. I got to tell you, when I'm talking to a religious believer, that is rare that I meet somebody that I can talk to without just being enraged at how they're lying it to me. So that's
thanks for
sets me off.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, when people lie to me, I hate that. And of course, I deal with creationists. They have to lie as a matter of course for it's their vocation. So there's no way around it for them. But if you're not going to do that, then I'm completely open to it.
Well, I see myself in you and others, and it's so tragic. I had these misunderstandings for so long. I know atheists are good people. I was one of them. I used to have, Aaron, you appreciate this.
If only you achieve this higher level of consciousness that I have, then you will be as great as I am.
Please don't get that message. Christians might come across holier than thou, but really we have the burden and should be helping other people. But when I was probably married 20 years when evangelicals would come up to me and say, "Hey, let me tell you about Jesus," and I would say, like, "And how many times you've been divorced? Like, what are you?" I was an atheist for 20 years by this point, And like, well, what are you going to tell me about fidelity and
there's
being a
somebody,
good person? So I know what you mean. I'm on your side.
there's somebody in my life that I just have to mention. Of course, I won't do it by name, but there's somebody in my life that implied to me very overtly, without actually using these words, that he is so much better than I am because he's a Christian.
Mm.
And he's never cracked open a Bible. He doesn't know what a creed is.
Yeah,
He doesn't know
he's in a lot of trouble, Aaron, let me tell you.
he doesn't know what the most basic requirement of Christianity is. He doesn't know what any of the definitions of Christianity are, but he's better than, and it doesn't matter that he's a drug addicted, multiple felony convictions, fornicator on his fourth marriage. None of that matters. He's a Christian. That makes him better than me.
Yeah, he's in a lot of trouble. Your own conscience will convict you.
Not his.
Yeah, that's why he's in a lot of trouble. You know, I study a lot of history. There's a guy named Saint Vincent Ferrer, probably made Mother Teresa look like an evil person. He'd go around just
everybody makes Mother Teresa look like an evil person. So this is not special.
Oh, okay, this guy goes around just helping people his whole life, every minute of every day. And I'm reading his memoirs, and at the end of every night, he just wrote about how despicable of a person he was. And the guy just loved everybody he came across. And that's the proper view of our situation here. We always fall short of what we're capable of doing. And that's the proper view of a Christian. One that thinks they're better than you, they're doing something wrong. You know, our view is not that we're better or worse. We're on the Titanic, and we found out that the ship is sinking. We're trying to say, hey, there's lifeboats over here. Let's get on the freaking lifeboats.
Are we gonna bring up suddenly anthropogenic climate change?
Yeah, I'm not a believer in that.
I didn't figure that you were.
Aren't you a skeptic of it?
Incontrovertible truths that you don't accept.
Yeah.
We have finite resources. We know that they're finite. But
I worked on some computer science modeling projects with NOAA, and their models they're so incomplete. You have to model the freaking sun to predict the Earth weather. Do you know that? Sunspots? Do you know that?
I know that the sun is a part of it, but I've read Glenn Morton and the stuff that he was publishing 10 years ago that was arguing about how we are dealing with finite resources. And if you admit that the resources are finite, that one admission alone will discharge all of your reservations against anthropogenic climate change.
Oh, hey, we're in a crisis where everybody's one breath, one meal, one heartbeat away from disaster. One little burp from the sun and humanity, life on Earth.
But it doesn't have to be the sun. The sun can be completely placid in the whole thing. It doesn't matter. Because we are dealing with finite resources, what we change about our environment and what we change specifically about our atmosphere will have an effect. And when we're doing this at an industrial level for decades, way faster than natural systems could ever produce,
well, here's what we have in common. The world is in a terrible state. I think this climate change sense of doom is actually has a spiritual basis.
It's not a sense of doom. It's not a sense.
Non-believers are manifesting it as climate change.
Okay, I'm a non-believer. I'm not manifesting climate change as a sense of doom. We can address this. But the first requirement of addressing and correcting that is admitting that it is real.
The climate is changing? That's real.
And that it's anthropogenic.
Okay.
Because of our own industries, yes. The way that we are displacing environmental factors and elements.
And look what's happening with the politicians. You know what they should do? I agree that the climate is extremely has a great deal of potential for damage, right? The politicians should be enacting like evacuation plans for coastal regions, building codes, how to get away from low-lying areas. But what do? They go after the money. Let's go tax the oil companies.
All of our major civilizations, all the biggest civilizations, are all on the shoreline. They're
Yeah,
all going to be the first to go. So
you
where's
can't get me to live within 50 foot of an ocean sea level.
yeah, but you can't get the entirety of the population to move to Kansas. Not that it would matter, because once the sea levels rise, Kansas, the Western Interior Seaway, which used to divide North America into two continents once upon a time, there was a 900-foot deep ocean, or well, let's say isthmus, that divided the Western and Eastern United States. Kansas and the entirety of Texas, and I think Colorado, the entirety of Colorado as well, all the way through Canada, were underwater at one point. So where are all of the people going to go? Ultimately, it comes down to an issue of overpopulation. You can't have so many. If you're going to have as many people as we do, you have to be extremely efficient in your food production and your energy production, and we're not. We are completely irresponsible in both. And
I think there's plenty of land at high level areas, but
there may be plenty of land at high level areas, but again, you have to be very efficient in energy production and in food production, and we are not, largely because we are still in denial of the fact that these are limited resources. And because we are talking about limited numbers, the amount of carbon that we pump into the atmosphere is going to have an effect. And the amount of oxygen
feel better.
The amount of oxygen that is produced in our forests that we're cutting down at the same time as we're doing all of the rest of this, that is also going to have a cumulative effect. That is inescapable.
Well, I'm for taking care of the environment. I'm sure I have less of a carbon footprint than Al Gore.
Huh? If you reject that climate change is anthropogenic, that our industries have an effect.
Well, it's just efficient to recycle and keep things clean, not put crap in the rivers like India and China do.
Which we are not doing.
I mean, you have to go after India and China. You want to drink out of one of those rivers? I think any river in the U.S. is better than
I haven't yet been to China, but I've been to India, and I understand how their systems work, or rather don't. I understand how their systems don't work. Matter of fact, India is the only country I've ever been to, ever in my life, that disappointed me. India is the only country I've ever been, and I always wanted to go to India because of my interest in comparative religions. I always wanted to go to India, but I was very disappointed to see how their infrastructure and their administrative incapabilities have caused this huge issue. If you go to Agra, if you want to go see the Taj Mahal, when you get to Agra, the sky will be blue. It'll be clear. That's no smog is what I mean. But everywhere else in that country is going to be covered in smog. And the thing is, they know that the smog is damaging to the Taj Mahal, and they know that the Taj Mahal is this huge tourist issue, and they know how to clear the sky. So they do it only in Agra. You go to Delhi and you can't see across the street without
it's terrible. In Beijing too.
Yeah, Beijing is I think the only place in the world that is worse than.
If you look at it as an engineer, Aaron, as an engineer, if you just look at the energy levels involved between the sun, the earth, our atmosphere, these are huge variables, and we got mankind as a tiny little variable. I know about the industrial capability of coal plants. I have friends that help design nuclear and coal plants. It just doesn't add up. I think the thick of Earth, the plants sucking up carbon is something that's not accounted for. The ocean's effect on carbon is not accounted. And the fact that the whole entire Earth as a sphere is surrounded by 450 degrees below zero. I mean, just one little puff of solar wind has a tremendous effect on the Earth. And instead of these engineering views, what politicians do, they just want to jump on deep money. Let's go after the money. It's corruption.
Yeah, and that's another problem. I don't want to identify as a socialist. I've never identified as a socialist, but I do see huge problems with runaway capitalism. And most of the environmental problems that we have, I mean, the vast majority of them can be directly attributed to runaway capitalism.
Yeah, unmitigated. Yeah, I agree. That's one thing. I don't know how much time we have left here, but
we've already exceeded our time,
okay.
sir.
One beautiful thing I found true, Aaron, as becoming a believer, the things that I knew true and are really true, like you are saying now about runaway capitalism, are true, and they'll be affirmed. It's so beautiful to have what you know. The things in your life I know you don't believe this. They're not random. The things, maybe you have memories that repeat in your mind. That's not a chemical doing that. It's this consciousness that's telling you to remember that for an important reason. You ever seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire? Where it's an awesome movie about all these crazy random things that happen to this guy. They don't make any sense. But at the end, he's in this talk show or this game show, and the questions just happen to get the $1 million, just happen to be those things that happened to him. And I think that's a good
we're very good at pattern seeking, and that's where a lot of the delusion that is religion has come from.
That's a conclusion I don't agree with.
I realize that currently you don't agree with it because currently you're under the mystification of religion, which I see as a sort of a cultural mental disorder. And I'm sorry to fallen ill to this, which has caused you to laugh and shake your head when I state things that maybe you would have stated back when you were sober.
Well, what's funny is I used to believe that.
I know, back when you were sober, you used to think like a sober person. And now that you're not sober, you're making fun of me for not being sober.
I'm not making fun of you, Aaron. I think you're a good person. It's so funny. You know, we have a mutual friend in David Ross, and he says, we got to talk to, you got to, you know, we have a mutual friend in David Ross. You went on his show. He says, you got to talk. We talk offline a lot about atheists, and because we were both former atheists. And he says, you really got to talk to Aaron. He's such a sweet guy. And
all right, please.
I wish you knew that sentiment behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, God, I wish if God had existed, that he should have been vastly more efficient than he is, especially if we're going to judge whether what.
Why should he be more efficient?
Well, you interrupted the answer to ask the question. He should be vastly more efficient than he is if he's going to punish us for not believing after he provided the proof that he doesn't exist.
I think the proof is all around us.
That he doesn't exist. That is correct.
That he
That's
exists.
the first thing you've said is
if you were to stumble upon a beach with a pile of Lego blocks landing there, what would you think about these Lego blocks? They came from some intelligent source, right?
Let's see. We're going back to the clock, the watchmaker argument. I forget.
It's intelligent design, but
I forget the confused philosopher who came up with that bogus argument that everybody buys into. It's really sad that they do. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to awaken you, give you enough coffee to pull you out of
Thanks.
your
I love
Catholicism.
Yeah, I know how crazy it seems, and I would probably.
No, I don't think you do. I don't think you do, because you bought into something that can't be justified in any sense.
Oh, I think it's completely rational. Actually, it's not just rational; it's the only basis of rationality. If you have a basis,
you're doing presuppositionalism now. How much deeper?
Can you say that in our Thurston Howell voice?
How much deeper into insanity can you dig? No.
No, this is completely rational, Aaron. If I'm saying that my basis for existence is a rational mind that created me, you're saying that an irrational set of energy, formed atoms that created you, your basis is irrationality.
You've just explained an irrational argument for your own position, and then tried to project it onto me, which again is irrational and a logical fallacy. So we've now exceeded an hour, and I have enjoyed it. I want to credit you with this. I have enjoyed it, and I know that there are believers in the comments who are gonna criticize me. I've done my very best not to interrupt you very much. I've tried not to be too passionate. That's one of the biggest complaints is that I get that I'm
I appreciate
passionate. That. One of the reasons that my passion hasn't overtaken me is because I haven't seen you overtly lie to me. Which, when I'm dealing with a young Earth creationist, that's normally the first thing that they do, and that sets me off. And while you technically would qualify as a young Earth creationist, you haven't overtly lied to me that I've noticed. So I'm going to let that go.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's important, because we're not going to be able to have a conversation otherwise. We have exceeded an hour, though, and I don't think that we're going to be able to get more productive. I can't say that you've presented reason one to have walked away from skepticism and adopted fuck all else, much less Catholicism. Yeah, we could probably do like another 30 or 40 episodes before I think we get to the first thing.
Yeah, the cosmic consciousness is step one. That's
Yeah, we haven't established that. I said even if I were to grant that, which I don't suspect, but even I will grant that that's a possibility. Probability, no, we haven't got there.
got you.
And that's and on the way to Catholicism, I predict, having had this argument a number of times, that's the only possibility I'll be able to grant, that the cosmic cosmos, in some sense, might possibly have a consciousness, in which case our creation is not important, it was not intended, not designed, and we have no purpose in our existence.
We're
And
the
that,
only
I think,
consciousness.
is inevitable.
Well, we can talk about that. I think we're the only consciousness. If the cosmos is consciousness, we'd be pretty precious to that.
All right. Anybody that is still watching so far, I would love to have an interview with a neurologist, a geologist. Anybody that is very adamant about the things that were said here, whether they're against my guest or whether they're against me. I'm completely open to that, and I'm open to have those conversations, and I invite them. And Steve, I'd like to have you on again.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, let's try to do this like once a month tentatively, or we can do it more often if you're convenient with it, or if that's
that sounds good. I'm moving into a new home. I moved away from Austin, and I really.
I'm sorry. Are you still in Texas?
No, I moved to Alabama.
Ooh! Oh my God!
They have the 10 Commandments.
I'm so sorry. There's only two places in the entirety of North America that are worse than Texas, and you moved to one of them.
But I am really appreciative of how gracious you are, and I see what David sees in you, that you're a careful thinker trying to get to the truth, and that's the right path.
Thank you very much, Steve. We will talk again, and I'm going to go ahead and close it up.
Thank you very much.